Chapter 10 Impasse. Ben was occupied in the onboard fresher when he was struck with a sudden realization. That smug green bastard. Being in the fresher for this moment was probably for the best. It was the only truly private part of the ship, and it wouldn't have done for Alara to hear him slandering the name of the Grandmaster for seemingly no reason. But it was, in point of fact, a very good reason as far as Ben was concerned. Master Yoda was green, and he was going to be very smug about this, and he was a complete bastard for pulling the wool over Ben's eyes. It was Ben's own fault for letting him, of course. He'd been so excited to get back out in the field that he had let go of his senses. True, being constantly mindful of the hazards of time travel did not come naturally to him, or anyone, he felt. But in retrospect, he really should have seen this coming. They were forcing his hand. Ben had no doubt that this exact scenario with the Rylothian refugees had arisen during his previous life, but of course he and Qui-Gon had been on leave. He would not have ever even heard of the report. Doubtless, another Jedi team had been dispatched to deal with the matter, whether it had been Alara and another Jedi, or another team entirely. There was no way for anyone to know anymore. Things had changed. Simply by being here and now, Ben Kenobi was altering history. And who was to say how things would play out? Obi-Wan's life had never been the predictable sort, and Ben expected no different from this iteration. Anything could happen, and he'd be the instigator, not someone else. Not whoever else it had been in his past life. Him. And he would have to work with Alara and report to the Council and live forevermore in the knowledge that no matter how things turned out in this mission, he could no longer be certain of this thing, this sequence of events, this future. It was a force-damned guilt trip is what it was. A delayed gimmer stick strike to the kneecaps. Sneaky, griffin, underhanded bastard. The fresher door slid open to reveal a ginger-topped glower not seen since the height of the Clone Wars. Ben returned to the co-pilot seat and fell into it, hands folded into sleeves. Alara watched him with a quiet sense of confusion, obviously sensing his foul mood. He masked it for her sake. After a while, they entered a silent agreement to not speak of his frown. "Are you sure you don't want the con, Master Kenobi?" Alara offered, deferring to his seniority. Ben waved a dismissal. "I assure you it's fine. I dislike piloting." She shrugged. "Very well. Navicomp reports we have 5 standard hours left." Ben only nodded. Even hyperspace had its limits. They'd been traveling for not quite 6 hours already and had only spoken to confirm mission details. They'd both read the dossier through and through at least twice. But now the only thing between them and the vastness of space was a thin ship hull and an ocean of silence. But it wouldn't do to arrive as strangers. He crossed his ankle over his knee and leaned back. "Have you ever been to Herdessa before, Master Dan?" he asked. He noted her slight flinch of surprise at his use of Master. "Ah, a new knight." "No, Master." Oh, and he was just Master, a very new knight. "But I have been to Ryloth." "Oh, whatever for?" He had to admit he was impressed. It was rare that the Jedi had reason to go out so far, especially as a Padawan or fresh graduate. "Training. I spent a year on Ryloth as a senior Padawan, to polish my Ryle." That made his eyebrows shoot up. "You fluent in Ryle?" He didn't bother hiding his amazement this time. It was a notoriously difficult language to learn, let alone perfect. "Ka, si. She gave him a smile that bespoke personal pride, and not misplaced in this instance. True fluency in any remote language was a rare asset. "Well," Ben said with a smile, "I certainly see why they've sent you on this mission, which only leaves me to wonder why on earth they'd settled you with me." "Master Yoda tells me you're a diplomat," Alara offered. Ben waved his hand. Well, he was, but surely all Jedi are diplomats, Master Dan. She looked vaguely uncomfortable, busying herself with checking fuel levels and flight paths. "Some more so than others," she intoned. He glanced at her and was unable to explain why there was a smirk tugging at his lips. "Really?" A ghost of unpleasant memory passed over her face. "Incredibly." He thought on this, still smiling. He couldn't blame her. He'd hardly ever been a natural diplomat in his younger days. Well, he had been, in fact, but far more brash a sort than he was now. "Master Yoda wants you to learn from me," he realized, recalling the Grandmaster's words. "A bit impolite of him to say so. You are a full-ranking knight, after all." Alara shrugged and said, with well-practiced neutrality, "Master Yoda believes I was knighted too early." Ben nodded slowly. He remembered what Qui-Gon had said about her master dying not too many years ago. He wondered if she'd been knighted in lieu of transferring her training for a few short years. "You were knighted when the Force willed it," he assured her. "Neither too early nor too late." She seemed surprised at the encouragement, but grateful. A pause passed between them before Alara said, "I'm still a rubbish diplomat." He laughed aloud, the feeling in his chest akin to something he'd felt before. He couldn't pinpoint it. "And I'm rubbish at speaking Ryle. So now we can see why we're teamed together. We each have our roles as teacher and learner. Though if you really wish to learn about diplomacy, I must warn you, I have been marked by a penchant for unconventional tactics." Togurta did not have eyebrows, but the left side of Alara's wide forehead drew up in a similar effect. "Aggressive negotiations?" she surmised. Ben laughed freely, and there was that burn of intangible familiarity again. "Exactly so, Master Dan, exactly so." Their landing at Herdessa was uneventful, but as soon as they lowered the ramp, they were overwhelmed by activity. Apparently the Jedi had not arrived a moment too soon, the Senator's arguments had reached fever peak, and the patience of the Herdessian administration was wearing exceptionally thin. "Senator Irrimore," Ben was the first one to the landing dock, "it is good to see you." "I cannot echo the sentiment more heartily, Master Jedi." Ben gave a customary bow. "I'm Ben Kenobi, and this is Master Alara Dan." They exchanged formalities, and the young senator waved them to follow her before taking off at a brisk pace. "Senators and ambassadors from the receiving systems are shut up in the Senate chamber, and I'm astonished security hasn't been called yet," she told the two Jedi. "I can't tell you how grateful I am that you're here to clear all this up. I've tried reasoning with them, but Senator Thane blames me for the burden placed on Kuat, and hears nothing I say. I was one of the ones who approved the Five-World Plan." "I don't suppose Senator Thane has been the sole incendiary in all of this?" Ben asked, already suspecting the answer. "Unfortunately, no. Her refusal to back down has inspired Senators Tardaak and Mi'i, Alzaka and Fedal to filibuster." "That can hardly be good," Alara chimed in. "Hardly is a mild word." The senator cast worried eyes upwards towards the sky just before they stepped inside. "Most of the refugees are still in orbit above the atmosphere. They haven't been registered with the Republic yet, so legally we cannot house them on planet so long as their ship's life support systems are still running, which they are." Ben frowned. "I was led to believe that the ships were damaged in their escape." "They were. Most of the navigational systems and hyperdrives are more or less useless at this point, but the ships are livable for the moment. Satellite housing. But it's only a matter of time before they start to shut down. We were able to process a few hundred of the Twi'lek to stay here, including the mayor of the Ryloth city, but we just don't have the resources to take in any of them, let alone all of them, all at once, until the bill is signed by all 5 senators." They turned a corner, and the dull echoes of argument could be heard rippling across the force. Alara and Ben shared a look. Senator Irrimore sighed heavily. "I'm afraid that if the debate wears on any longer, the ships may shut down entirely, and we'll have pandemonium trying to take in 80,000 Twi'lek while keeping the ships from plummeting to the surface. And that's just to save lives. The fallout will be a bureaucratic nightmare in the immigration office and is sure to have orbit security locked down for months. I've already got 6 caucuses and a whole army of lobbyists and protesters breathing down my neck. This is no longer a squabble between core worlds. This is a triage situation for refugees and Herdessa. We need to get those ships on the ground, the Twi'lek registered, and out of our orbit." They'd arrived at the Senate chamber doors. Irrimore turned to the two Jedi. "Taking in Outer Rim peoples takes a lot of paperwork. Taking in 80,000 of them is hellish. I can see why they're arguing, but it has to stop. For the Twi'lek's sake and ours. Please, Masters, work quickly." "We shall do our very best, Senator." Ben bowed and stepped forward to the door panel. Alara followed him and remembered to walk beside him, not behind, only as the senator's attention began to attach to the cloak-clad newcomers as they strode into the room. The hall fell silent. One senator, whom Ben recognized as a very young Damaera Thane, scoffed at the sight of them. "Master Jedi," someone else said. Ben's heart wrenched off its hinges, beating a whirl as he turned to look. From a seat by the door, a young man in a senator's robes rose to his feet, looking relieved. "It is very good to see you here at last." Ben was suddenly fighting back tears. 2 worlds volunteered. Oh, he should have known. He had seen on the dossier that one had been Alderaan, but he had thought it was too early in history to expect this man and his heart of gold. He was so glad to be wrong. Smiling, Ben swallowed his emotion and mustered the most sincere, even tone he could manage. "It is good to see you as well, Senator Organa." Despite Ben's hastily thrown-up shields, Elara could sense his intense feeling. She glanced at him, curious, but he only shook his head and turned back to the others in the room. "Senators," he greeted, bowing slightly. "I am Jedi Master Ben Kenobi, and this is Master Elara Dan. We have been sent to expedite the negotiations over the refugee resettlement bill." "Outrageous!" burst Senator Thane, slamming a hand on the arm of her chair and rising to her feet. "The Senate has already coerced Kuat and her people into an unjustified agreement. Now they plan to force the rest of it down our throats at Sabertip?" Elara bristled and opened her mouth to release a sharp retort, but Ben held out a hand to stay her aggression. "My deepest apologies, Senator. We are merely following orders and have no personal quarrel with Kuat. We are here to assist you." He used his most honeyed voice and willed his eyes to look as big as possible. All his life, Obi-Wan would deny any claims that he was anything special to look at. But beneath his self-deprecating words, he was fully aware that other people, particularly women, could find him a bit disarming. It was a boon to be young again, and not just for the joints. He gave Thane a guileless smile. "Surely you cannot want negotiations to drag on. I understand you have all been here some time." A few quiet grumbles from around the room. Thane looked a bit lost, too caught up in attack mode to process an apology. She jut out her chin. "Drag on? No. Come to an agreeable conclusion? Yes. But I assure you, Master Kenobi, everything the Senate, and its dogs' bodies," she glanced at Bail and the senator beside him, "have suggested thus far leaves much to be desired." Ben nodded, upholding his air of charm. "I see. If you would enlighten us, Senator." Thane fixed Senator Organa with a stony glare. "It has been suggested," she explained, "that Kuat take in no less than 25,000 of the refugees, a number far in excess of the 1/5 share we agreed to on Coruscant." "Numbers were not part of the discussion, Master Jedi," Bail corrected his colleague, "which is why we have convened here, to finalize the division of the refugees as recommended by the Chancellor's Committee." "Kuat will not accept such an unfair burden on its people." Thane spoke more loudly to reclaim the conversation. "Kuat did not volunteer for this role. If Alderaan is so ready to take in refugees, why not take the lion's share?" Ben glanced between her and Bail. He weighed his words. "I understand that Kuat is by far the largest world involved in this agreement, and has arguably the strongest economy of the 5. Why is it surprising that the Republic should ask Kuat to take in such a number?" "It is not unreasonable," said the senator seated next to Bail, a short, dark-skinned man with his desire to resolve this mess written all over his face. "The proposed allotments were made on a percentage scale, taking into consideration the available space and resources immediately available on each planet. Kuat is, as you have said, Master Kenobi, the largest and most well-resourced of the 5. "Perhaps not after these refugees take over our capital," Thane spat. "And what of Alsaka?" cut in the thin voice of Senator Tardak. "We have half the resources of Kuat and are still being forced to take in 15,000 refugees through our capital city. It will unbalance the entire region." Bail Organa shook his head. "Senator Thortheli's point still stands." He nodded at the senator to his side. "The Republic has taken all of these factors into account in calculating the proportional amount of refugees to be taken in by each world. You cannot tell me that you are in the same plight as Kuat, Tardak." Tardak sputtered, and me from Fadal spoke up instead, elaborate gold headdress tapping against her cheeks. "The Republic's cursory glances at our economies cannot represent the realities facing our people today," she insisted with well-rehearsed vehemence. "If Fadal is forced to resettle the proposed 10,000 Twi'lek in our administrative capital, there will be mayhem. They cannot speak basic, they do not understand our ways, they cannot pay for housing or food. It will ruin us." Thortheli rejoined the conversation. "The Republic will give full financial reimbursement to all 5 worlds to take in refugees." His tone suggested that he'd said this 5 or 6 times already. "Your concerns over money are baseless." "It is not merely money that worries me, Senator," Thane snarled, chin poised high. "It is our way of life, our culture that stands to ruin. I will not allow a fleet full of illiterate off-worlders to upset centuries of Kuati culture. May I remind you, Senator Thane, that the Kuati culture itself is based on the accomplishments of a fleet full of human immigrants. Elara could restrain herself no longer. If you truly hold your world's culture in such high esteem, you ought to welcome such an echo to your revered history. Thane regarded her with contempt. I suppose you would support such an upset, Mistress Jedi. Your tail-headed brethren must have your highest esteem. Alara's eyes widened at the unexpected slur, and Ben's face erupted in a snarl. Senator Thane, I would advise you to watch your tongue, he snapped, stepping slightly in front of Elara to prevent her from retaliating. Continue on such a line and I will be forced to file a formal charge against you for a sentient rights violation. Yes, Thane didn't miss a beat. And it will be lost in the administrative labyrinth of Coruscant for months, maybe years, and by the time you've swatted my knuckles, some other world, far more philanthropic, I'm sure, will have already volunteered to bow themselves to the Republic's unlawful demands. She glared. I stand by my words, Master Kenobi. You speak for your whole world, Elara said, audibly fighting off anger. Do you hold no respect for your electorate? I hold every respect for them, Thane replied, serene and cutting. And they harbor no goodwill for the Republic's demands. I'd speak to them myself, Elara hissed. Ben put a hand on her arm quietly. I call for a motion to recess, Bail Organa said, eyebrows high in exasperation. Seconded, Thothili said immediately. All in favor? Aye, said Bail, Thothili, and Tardak. Thane glared at her ally, who shrunk back, realizing his mistake. The senators filed out of the chambers. Ben stayed behind close to Elara, who fumed. It may be better to send them somewhere else. Elara glared daggers as Thane left the room. Even if she signed the bill, can you imagine what the Kuati will do to the Twi'lek once they arrive? It was a fair point. Yes. Ben rubbed at his beard, musing. Still, he gave Elara a masterly look. Do not let your anger unbalance you. What she said was completely uncalled for, but we are Jedi. We do not get snippish. Elara nodded, taking deep, centering breaths. Yes, Master Kenobi. He was right, after all. Ben shrugged. Not yet, anyway, which made her smile a tiny bit. Masters. Bail Organa was approaching, and Ben felt his heart constrict again. Elara was too preoccupied to comment. Bail let out a breath, at a loss for eloquence. It is a mess, he said, shrugging helplessly. To say nothing of the Twi'lek's precarious situation in orbit, Ben added. The droop in Bail's shoulders steepened. It's bad enough in here. I haven't heard anything of them recently. Are the ships still all right? Functioning, yes, but failing, Elara told him, folding hands into sleeves. Bail rubbed at his eyes. She wondered if he'd slept recently. She glanced out the windows as if she could see the ships from here, but of course there was only blue sky and clouds. If Elara had known Ben any better than she did, and if Bail had been able to call upon the memories of his older, alternate dimension self, one of the two would have been able to identify the brooding furrow in Ben's brow, the pensive way in which he stroked his beard, the dangerous angle of his squint. If either had known to look for any of these things, then one of them would have given him a cautious look and said something along the lines of, "Oh no." But by the will of the Force, neither was familiar with Ben, and neither humans nor Togruta had the ability to smell trickery on a man, so neither Bail nor Elara recognized it when the negotiator began to unfold his bag of tricks and select a volatile gambit. Ben let go of his beard and crossed his arms, legs assuming a leg soldier's pose. Clearly Thane and her retinue have no intention of relenting until they've brushed this whole thing under someone else's rug. If we want to resolve this once and for all, we have to get them to sign the bill now. Which they will not do, Bail reassured. Ben nodded. Not willingly, no, he said with careful emphasis. Elara frowned at him, almost warningly. What are you suggesting, Master Kenobi? Bail asked. Ben shrugged mildly. I'm suggesting that we are going to have to be very persuasive. Aggressive negotiations? Elara couldn't believe they'd jumped to this point already. Granted, she'd been warned, but she found herself surprised at Ben's tenacity. She rested her hand on her lightsaber hilt, ready for the proposed fight. Ben saw the gesture and scoffed. Oh, come now, he gave her a disappointed look. No need to be uncivilized. I said persuasive. What do you think Thorthelia and I have been doing for the past week, Master Kenobi? Bale challenged. Ben was unfazed. Attempting to be persuasive, and admirably so, Senator Organa. However, I believe you will find that politicians such as Thane only respond to more substantial forms of argument. I take it you have a plan, then? I do. But first, what do you think of the fact that the Relothian ships above our heads have just plummeted out of the sky? What? Bale was alarmed. You said they were still livable. Did something happen? He cursed. I knew that would happen. Oh, good, Ben said mildly. You weren't surprised. He gave Bale's shoulder a reassuring pat. Have no fear, Senator. The refugees are quite safe. But if you believed it were possible, so will Thane. Master? Alara asked, really wishing she knew what Ben was about to get them into. He was rubbing his beard again, a glint in his eye. We have come to an impasse, trapped between an unstoppable foe and an inevitable catastrophe. The Relothian ships are the key. They are a ticking time bomb, and Thane knows this. So long as the threat of a dying fleet looms above Herdessa, Thane knows that we are duty-bound to make these negotiations go as quickly as possible. She's made it into a game of waiting for us to give in. And so far it's going rather well for her, said Bale, dark circles under his eyes. Alara had her gaze fixed on Kenobi. What was he up to? So we are led to believe. However, we can use the ships to turn the negotiations to our favor. How so? Alara asked. It's quite simple. We shoot them down. What? Bale gasped. Alara's look was incredulous to the extreme. Master Kenobi, I really must object. Now just listen for a moment. Ben placated, a steady hand out to stay their protests. We are very quickly running out of options. We have 3 senators who refuse to see reason. We have days or hours before the systems on those ships shut down completely and send a whole fleet burning to the planet's surface. He looked into their faces to see if they would contest any of these facts. They did not. He continued, The fleet's imminent disaster is Thane's checkmate, and it is one we cannot escape through rhetoric. But if we ensure that the disaster happens on our terms, her trump card becomes our advantage. You're saying that we should intentionally crash the refugees' ships to pressure Thane and the rest to sign the bill? Alara asked dubiously. Put in crude and simple terms, Ben said, nodding. Yes. Bale and Alara shared a look, an unspoken conversation passing between them. Is he crazy? Bale's eyes asked. Alara shrugged with her forehead. Bale bit the inside of his lip, and Alara sighed in sympathy. After a moment, the 2 young people turned to look at the elder, shorter man. Bale slowly, almost reluctantly, crossed his arms. I'm listening, he said. Ben's dimples shone.